Welcome back to Radio Signals. My name is Mark, and my call sign is N9WIB. This is the Technician License Series, lecture number 19, and today we're going to cover operating regulations. Operating regulations are going to be comprised of various different things. We will define what a control operator is, and we will learn how to properly identify ourselves over the radio by FCC rules, review different types of interference, and then go over third-party communications, and then remote and automatic operation. And finally, we will end with different types of prohibited transmissions. A control operator is a licensed amateur radio operator responsible for making sure transmissions comply with FCC rules. So when you're operating your radio, either at home, in your car as a mobile, or with an HT if you're on a hike, you are the control operator. And the point at which you're controlling that radio is called the control point. So whenever the control operator operates a transmitter, that is known as the control point. It could be locally or from a remote location connected by the internet, phone, line, or radio link. So the control operator can actually control a transmission from a control point that's distant from the transmitter itself by a remote radio link, which we'll get into in a little bit. Guest operating. You can allow another ham to use your radio equipment or station. So let's take some examples. So if you're a general class operator and you have one of your friends who's another general class operator over for a Saturday afternoon and you want to do some DXing, then you're both considered control operators, or the person that's actually controlling the radio is considered the control operators. You or the other person are not guest operators. But let's say that you're an amateur extra and you invite your friend over who's a technician class, and they can operate on 2 meters and within their privileges to the heart's content as a control operator. But let's say they want to try HF and you want to teach them how to do a little bit of DXing within the general class or extra class privileges. They now become a guest operator, and you and them and they are responsible for proper radio operation within FCC guidelines. So as long as you're present and as long as you are the control operator, they can operate your rig as a guest operator under your privilege class. So again, the technician that comes over on that Saturday afternoon can operate on the general class frequencies or extra class frequencies as long as you hold that higher license. This is commonly done during field day. So a lot of people may be getting together for field day in a park or a different location, and there could be a single control operator at an HF station. Let's say they're advanced class, and that person will be the control operator, but they can invite and start teaching other hams who are technicians to operate those frequencies and get them interested in DX. But they are not the control operator. They are the guest operator. You remain the control operator for that station as long as they're operating beyond their class privileges. And another important thing to remember is that if you as a control operator steps away, let's say you need a lunch break and your technician friend is operating the HF rig, they have to cease operation above their class. So if they want to operate on 10 meters with their technician class privileges, they can do that. But as soon as you're away from the station, you are no longer functioning as a control operator, and that person has to operate within their license privilege. And another important thing to remember is that the guest operator and station owner are responsible for proper operation of the station under FCC rules. Identification. You must identify yourself when transmitting and communicating using amateur radio. So what does this mean? It essentially means you need to use your call sign. So don't make a transmission and go on and on and on without identifying yourself within the appropriate time frame by announcing your call sign. Unidentified transmissions are not allowed. You cannot repeatedly transmit without identifying yourself. The only exception to this is when your transmission is controlling a model aircraft or a different craft, a boat or something else. For FCC regulations, you must identify every 10 minutes and at the end of conversation. So this is going to be an exam question. So identify every 10 minutes and at the end of your transmissions at the final conclusion of your conversation. So a lot of people use their call sign at the beginning of a transmission. However, this is not required, but it is common practice and good practice. It's good to identify yourself to other hams and call the other ham that you're looking for by the call sign and not necessarily the first name. You can start using first names once you get into a conversation, but it's always good practice to identify yourself up front as well, but it is not required legally. And if you do try to access a repeater or test a frequency or see if a repeater is active or see if you can actually get to a repeater to make sure it's in range, don't just click the push to talk and let go. So that's called kerchunking. And why is it called kerchunking? Because that's what the sound sounds like when you hit the PTT and release it. So that's not good amateur practice. You need to use your call sign. So you're technically transmitting. So if you're transmitting and you're not identifying yourself, that is against FCC rules and regulations, and you could get fined for that. So if you want to test out a repeater, push to talk, make sure it's not being used first, and say your call sign and the word testing. So November 9 Whiskey India Bravo, testing the so-and-so repeater. And then identify yourself at the end of transmission if you keep going and keep testing. So as part of a conversation with another ham, you are not required to give the other station's call sign. They are responsible for identifying themselves. So it's good practice if you want to call them at the beginning of the conversation, but you are not required to utilize their call sign. And interestingly, you may also communicate to another ham in a foreign language, but you must identify yourself with your call sign in English. So let's say you want to practice your language skills. Let's say you learn Spanish or German or something else, and you want to practice communicating with your friend over simplex or through a repeater or with a net or some other means. You can communicate using that language, but you need to identify your call sign in English. Other things, the FCC recommends phonetic pronunciation of call signs. So N9WIB is fine, but you might want to carry it out a little bit and say November 9 Whiskey India Bravo, so people have a little bit of time to actually understand or comprehend the letters in your call sign. So this is not an FCC rule. It is not required. You can just say the letters and numerals, but it is a recommendation. And you can also identify using CW. So if you're transmitting in CW, obviously you're going to use your call sign and use CW to transmit your call sign. However, if you're having a simplex conversation on HF or single sideband, you can actually talk on single sideband using the phone method, but transmit your call sign using CW. That's not commonly done, but it is legal to do so. Other means of identification, let's say you're working some type of public event. Let's say you're working a race, a marathon, and you can use what's called tactical call signs. So it would be impractical for a bunch of hams to identify themselves by their call signs only if they're working certain parts of the race. Let's say they're working first aid stations 1 through 5. So people would get confused if the ham radio operators just utilize their call sign. They should use something called a tactical call sign. So for example, this would be a transmission. So first aid station number 1 to first aid station number 2. This is November 9 Whiskey India Bravo. Do you have some gauze for us to utilize? We're running low on gauze. Can you bring some over? So essentially, you're identifying what you are, what the station is, First Aid Station 1, and you're calling somebody else. So First Aid Station 2, but you also have to utilize your call sign in that. So First Aid Station number 1 is your tactical call, and you must utilize your call sign after that. So use it per FCC regulations every 10 minutes and at the end of the conversation. There are also something called self-assigned indicators. So let's say that you're operating mobile. So I would say November 9 Whiskey India Bravo / mobile. So if I'm calling, that's how I would identify myself. If it was CW or data. And if I was on a boat, I'd do the same thing. I could do November 9 Whiskey India Bravo / maritime or N9 WIB / portable. So the self-assigned indicators can go after the call sign. That's common. They can also go before the call sign, so mobile and 9WIB, or they can go before and after the call sign. That would be probably a little bit of overkill, so you can choose where you want to put it. You can put it before, after, or both, but it's most common to probably have your self-assigned indicator after your call sign. There are various types of interference, and we learned about interference in previous lectures. QRN is natural interference. The N, remember, is natural. QRM, or mic, QR mic, is man-made interference. And this could be computers, small switching power supplies, power lines, grow lamps, whatever. So this is man-made interference. It is not natural interference. And again, an example of natural interference could be atmospheric noise with lightning. You could use filters to reduce interference. There are various filters to help you eliminate either QRN or QRM. So that's something you can get used to with your own rig. Harmful or intentional interference. So harmful interference is defined as something that seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts communication. So this, again, may be on your test, so I'll repeat it once again. Seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts communication is harmful interference. And harmful interference can be accidental, where you don't mean to do it, but it can also be willful, meaning that it is deliberate. Someone's trying to deliberately interfere with other people's transmissions or conversations. Willful interference is never allowed, and it is against FCC regulations, and you can be heavily fined if you're found out and you're identified and they determine that you have been causing harmful or willful interference. Accidental interference can be caused by strong nearby signals with a very sensitive receiver. So let's say you have another amateur radio station operating at full legal limit, maybe a block away from you, and you have your receiver sensitivity turned way up. So you may want to turn your sensitivity down a little bit when that transmitter is transmitting, because it may overpower your station. Same thing holds true for other potential radio stations in the area, either AM broadcast, FM broadcast, TV, television stations. They may cause significant overload and a little bit of signal splatter into the ham bands that may cause some interference. Some transmitters can also create spurious signals off your desired frequency. So some of the cheaper, maybe imported transmitters or HT or mobile rigs may not be as well built as something of a higher quality, so they can also cause spurious signals off the desired frequency. So they're transmitting other signals beyond what you're actually interested in. Overmodulation can also result in splatter. Operating too close to another operator's frequency may also overlap bandwidth and cause interference. And this is something that's very, very common, especially on HF. It's either due to the people being at a skip zone that they're not necessarily hearing your station or a net in operation, and they might be within your bandwidth and overlapping your transmission. Or it just may be poor amateur practice. Maybe they can hear you and they're not willing or not courteous enough to go a few, another kilohertz either up or down the frequency to get out of your current transmission to separate enough to not cause interference. So this is not commonly done. This is not necessarily intentionally done. This is usually very accidental, or if somebody, again, is operating in skip zone and they can't hear the other station, they may be doing it accidentally, and there's no way around it because they can't hear you. So it could be fully accidental. So pay attention to your own transmissions and be courteous to others. So listen to the frequency for a while. Ask if the frequency is in use. Look at the frequency above and below your transmission frequency of interest and make sure the area is clear, and make sure you're not overlapping frequencies with someone else. Third-party communication. Ham radio operators can relay messages on behalf of an unlicensed person or organization. One amateur radio control operator relays messages to another control operator on behalf of another person. This is known as a third party. So that third person that's not there, and it's not the control operator, that's the third party. So this is third party communication. So this must be done through two control operators. The third party does not necessarily need to be present at the amateur station. They can be, and if they can choose to take part in the relayed message. They may speak into the microphone, they may type in the keyboard, or they can send CW if they know how when the control operator is present. So you need a control operator for third-party communication. So this is commonly done. So if a message needs to be relayed, if there's a traffic net, and let's say that for some reason communications are down and a family member wants to relay a message to another family member, that can be done through amateur radio operators. So, but the third party is not a ham radio operator. There is also third-party communication internationally. So, however, internationally, the country of origin and destination, they have to allow third-party communication. There has to be a third-party communication agreement between countries. So let's take an example of maybe Australia and the United States. Those two countries, Australia does have a third-party communication agreement with the United States. Bolivia does, Brazil does, Israel, United Kingdom. These are just a handful of countries that have third-party communication agreements with the U.S. So if a third-party communication agreement does not exist, then you cannot relay that person's communication. So as an example, maybe your son and daughter or someone else is overseas on vacation or taking school or at a university, and you want to relay a message home. You can do that, but it has to have a third-party communications agreement with that specified country. So you can find this out on the ARRL website and look it up. Just Google third-party communications, ARRL, and you should come up with a decent list to see if the countries have established agreements between each other. Remote and automatic operation. So first we have to identify what local control is. A local control, again, utilizes a control operator that is physically present at the station. So if I'm operating my ham radio, my mobile rig inside my car, I am the control operator and the mobile rig is under local control. If I'm on a hike and I have my handy-talkie with me, I am the control operator and I'm operating the HT under local control. A remote operation, The control point and operator are not physically present at the transmitter. The control operator manages the station off-site through a control link, such as the internet connection. So let's say that there's somebody that lives in a valley and they're an amateur radio operator, and they happen to put their antenna up, their transmitter, on a remote mountain that is maybe a few miles away. So they're not physically there and they can't control it. They can operate it from their house or their home in the valley, but they're 2-3 miles away from the actual antenna and the transmitter. So that ham can actually operate that station remotely through the internet, and that's called remote operation. So the control point and operator are not present at the transmitter site. They're operated at a remote location. Automatic operation is different as well. A station operates under control of an automated device under FCC rules. So an automatic station or automatic operation there are examples such as beacons. So that's one potential automatic operation. So the control operator is still required, but does not need to be at the control point when transmitting. So there needs to be a control operator, but does not need to be at the control point when transmitting. Other examples of automatic operation include repeaters, APRS digiputers, and of course, beacons. Prohibited transmissions. Unidentified transmissions are definitely prohibited, as we covered in previous slides. You must use your call sign. You can't just get on the radio and talk for 15 or 20 minutes without identifying yourself. It's against FCC regulations. Other types of prohibited transmissions include false or deceptive signals. Example, using somebody else's call sign. So getting on the radio and utilizing another person's call sign deceptively, that is prohibited and against regulations. You cannot use obscene or indecent speech, and you cannot transmit a false distress or emergency signal. That's a huge deal because you're activating EMS, you're activating a fire rescue service, you're activating police. You cannot do that. That will put a lot of people in danger and potentially take some valuable resources away from somebody who actually needs that. So that is an absolutely prohibited transmission. Do not send false distress or emergency signals. And commercial transmissions, or those for monetary gain, are not allowed. Again, prohibited. So along the same lines, it's okay to advertise amateur radio equipment for sale over the air as long as it is not a routine business doing so. You can't have a home business buying and selling amateur radio equipment and then getting on a net every single night and operating for yourself, for profit, selling your radio equipment. That's just not allowed. If you want to advertise every once in a while, say to your friend, hey, or on a net, hey, I've got an extra old HF rig that I'm looking to get rid of. Somebody please contact me if they're interested. These are the very brief details. That's okay. So as long as you're not running a business selling radio equipment over the air, and every once in a while, if you have something to sell or advertise to other hams on a very infrequent basis, that's absolutely fine. It's okay to describe your business as part of a casual conversation. So let's say that you own a flower shop and you're describing to another ham. The other ham asks you what you do for a living. So it's okay to actually describe what you do and describe your business, but it's not in casual conversation. But it's not okay to get on the air and actually advertise your business or professional services over the air. So you're not trying to promote yourself. You're not trying to bring customers into your business. You're not advertising deals over the air for your business. So that's not okay. But it is okay just to informally discuss your business with another ham, but not with the intent of bringing customers into your business or benefiting in a monetary fashion, advertising for your business. Encrypted transmissions. Transmission of secret codes or obscure content intended to prevent others from comprehending the content is prohibited. So you can't transmit secret codes. You can't transmit something that's unintelligible to another ham radio operator or the general population. This gets a little bit murky. So there's data encoding and decoding. So for data to be effectively transmitted and decoded on the opposite end of a digital communication, you do have to have a conversion of voice to a digital binary signal. And that signal also has to undergo data compression to effectively transmit or efficiently transmit that data set or the information over the airwaves in a digital format. But data encoding, decoding, and compression are all obviously legal because there are protocols that are fairly easy to find out there, and methods of decoding and encoding that data are available. So if you want to look up the encoding protocol or the decoding protocol, it should be fairly easy to do so. And so that therefore that's not an encrypted transmission. An encrypted transmission, the purpose of that is to hide the content of the message, and that is prohibited. So the only approved use of encryption is for radio control and control of transmissions to a space station where interception could have serious consequences. So you can use an encrypted signal for radio control and control of a transmitter to a space station as long as that is for the sole purpose. So as long as you don't want anyone else controlling your space station because it may result in harm to others, that's a legitimate reason. Broadcasting. Broadcasting is a one-way transmission intended for reception by the general public. Ham radio, we don't broadcast. We're not broadcasters. So we have conversations. We talk to other people, but we don't have one-way conversations and transmit data for broadcasting. Broadcasting is prohibited in amateur radio with the following exceptions. Transmitting CW practice, so there could be code practice, that's fine. Information or bulletins for amateur radio operators like the ARRL News, that's broadcasting in a sense, but that's allowed. And also when needed for emergency communication, so that's allowed as well. Transmission of music or other entertainment content is prohibited even if it's background music. So if you've got your radio in your car or in the background, turn it down. That can't be transmitted over the waves. Music can only be rebroadcast as a part of an authorized space station transmission. So that's another example. I don't think you'll be doing that. Retransmitting signals of another station is also prohibited except when relaying messages of digital data from another amateur station. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Radio Signals. And we hope you learned a lot today. We reviewed what a control operator is, reviewed methods of identification, reviewed interference, and then introduced third-party communications, remote and automatic operation, and then finally ended with prohibited transmissions. So we'll see you next time, and if you would like to do so, please consider supporting us on radiosignals.org on the support button. Have fun as usual in 73. See you next time.